Hey guys, welcome to another sophisticated Saturday challenge for you. So on this transaction, this is a live transaction, so it's actually going through a very interesting phase at the moment. I'll update you when it's all completed, but we actually started this transaction about 3 years ago. It was a novel one for me. I'd never had it before. I actually took it to my two mentors at the time, and pretty much both of them said it was impossible to do, but we did solve it. But here's the information that you need. Here's the challenge for you. I had a contact of mine. I knew her from a networking group, funnily enough, a property networking group. I did used to go to property networking events, less so now if I'm honest. This lady came up to me and she said, look, I'm coming to these events because I need some help. I've got an opportunity. I'm not an investor, but I want to be an investor. And the opportunity that I have is for me to buy my council house. So I've got the right to buy it. And as some of you know, you get really good discounts. I've seen discounts of 40, 50, I think 60% if possible. On this one, she had the right to buy it. I think it was 50% below market value. However, she'd had the property valued a year before, and it'd gone up in value massively in the last 12 months. And she only had, I think she had like 2 weeks, 14 days or 18 days or something like that left before the offer expired. And it was in London. And so it's seen really good capital growth over the last 12 months. And she said, if I don't buy it in the next, call it a couple of weeks, I'm going to have to revalue it. It'll be revalued, and she was going to end up spending quite a lot more money on the property. Now, the problem is she had no way of raising the finance. She didn't have the money she required. We're talking about a pretty expensive property here. And she said, can you help me? Because there's so much equity here. So the equity was in the region of about £140,000. So the property was something like £280,000. I'm deliberately not giving you the precise numbers because I don't want to identify the transaction in any way because it's still a live transaction. I went to my two mentors and I asked them, I sat down, I thought about it. For those of you that don't know, there are a lot of rules around right to buy deals because the councils don't want to hand over a massive discount just for the individual to make a profit. So I'll outline the rules for you and then you can work out what questions you might have to ask. So ask of the vendor. So the first rule is they can't sell the property within 10 years without asking permission, and the council for within that 10-year period get the right to buy the property back at the same price. So that's the first rule. The second rule is within the first 5 years, the discount has to be paid back on a sliding scale. So within the first 12 months, 100% of the discount has to be paid back. Within the second year, 80%. Within the third year, 60%. And after 5 years, none of the discount has to be paid back. So the individual, the purchaser, interestingly, we're negotiating with a purchaser here rather than a vendor, quite unusual. The purchaser gets to keep that discount after 5 years. So obviously you're trying to help them to buy the property and then keep the property for 5 years. They can't sell it, and so the obvious answer is, well, we'll just do an exchange with delay completion, or we'll do an option to buy, or something similar. However, it's not that simple. Once you read the small print, and I went through the small print, there's probably no deal that I've spent more time on than this one. I sat down, it must have been for about 2 days. It was like a Mensa challenge, and I went through every document I could find. I went through all their terms and conditions. I went through case law, as much information as I could find on this to make sure that the deal worked for us now, at the time, and later on. And so there's no way that you can agree to a transaction without triggering this refund. So any kind of lease option, exchange, any kind of agreement to sell triggers the event that means that the discount is repayable. And I'm not in the business of, doing something and pretending that we haven't done it. I want everything to be above board. I want everything to be, completely correct and within the rules. I'm all for jumping through hoops and making deals work, but it has to be within the rules. So hence why I sat down and studied their terms and conditions. They write the rules, and it's our job to play the game as well as we possibly can. So that is your challenge. You've got a massive discount, got a highly motivated purchaser rather than a vendor, and how are you going to help them? I've done this as a no money down deal. There's a lot of income there for me. I've been making a good income for the last 3 years. There's a good chunk of income for me now that it's about to come to an end. But how did I do it? After the break, I will tell you my thought process. I'll tell you the questions I had to ask of the purchaser, the questions I had to ask of the literature and of the council, and how we actually made money from it. See you after the break. Welcome back. So what questions did you decide that you needed to ask of the purchaser, of the council, and how did you actually structure this deal? I'm interested. Did you write them down? Did you come up with a solution? How are you going to make money from this? I have never heard of anyone managing to do a deal like this with rent to buy, and the reason for that is councils and the government have had their best lawyers looking at this, trying to plug all of the loopholes, because people like you and I have been trying to monetize it for since Margaret Thatcher bought it in a good few years ago. So this is how I did it. I looked at it and I thought, right, there's no way of us buying it without lying and pretending that we haven't entered an agreement, and that's not how I want to play. I want to play with a straight bat. And so I then looked at, well, how else can you take control of a property? Combined with, she needs to pay them a chunk of money, so the council need 50% of the valuation from the 12 months previously. So there's a nice chunk of money, but we have to get it into the purchaser's hands. We have to protect ourselves, and we need to make sure that we monetize it afterwards. So these are the questions I had to check. I had to check what protection we could have if we lent her the money. And that's the route I went down. We became the mortgage lender. I went to an investor and I said, look, we can lend this purchaser the money. They can buy this property. We can get a charge on the property for this money. We can charge an interest rate. We can charge a very high interest rate, because she wanted to just refinance. She couldn't get finance in 14 days, but she said, if you can just give me a loan for 12 months, I'll be in a position to refinance, pay you back, and then I'll keep the property. So I checked that we could get a first charge on the property. You can't get a first charge on a rent to buy property, and the reason for that is because the council want to protect their interests. So if you use NatWest or Lloyds or Birmingham Midshires or someone a mainstream lender, and they actually have a list. They have a list of every lender that they consider mainstream. And this is only one particular council, by the way, so you have to check this depending on where you're going to do the deal. But in terms of us actually getting a charge, we could have a charge because we're a non-stream lender. Obviously, Flegg Limited, that wasn't the company name, but isn't listed on their mainstream lenders list. So what we did is we checked that we could actually have the second charge. So the council take the first charge and we took the second charge, which is fine. The council aren't going to repossess, and if they do, we still get our money. So it's all fine. So that's how we protected ourselves. The investor put the money in, so put the money required for the purchase in. It was a first time buyer purchase, so there wasn't massive stamp duty. Legals weren't too high. We covered ourselves with the loan agreement. We got our second charge. However, there's no agreement to buy. There can't be an agreement to buy, because otherwise the discount is repayable, and that doesn't work. So what we did is we structured the loan in such a way, and this was very openly done with the purchaser, we structured the loan in such a way that she would be crazy not to repay it after the 12 months. So what we did is we made the interest payable really low over the first 12 months, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and she made sure that she could pay that interest by letting the property out. Now there's a few issues here you have to be careful about. The first is the Consumer Credit Act. You must not lend money to an individual. That's a FCA regulated activity. So I don't know whether they would mind if you lent your dad a tenner. I don't think they'd really have an issue with that. But if you start lending £100,000 to a third party individual, and that third party individual doesn't like that you've done it, or wants to wriggle out of the loan, if they go running to the FCA, you might have an issue on your hands because you're not FCA registered, you haven't followed a certain process, you could be deemed to be a loan shark, for want of a better phrase. And so that's the massive pothole here. You're not allowed to lend money to an individual, but you are allowed to lend money to a company. That's absolutely fine. And you are allowed to lend money to an individual if it's for a business purpose. So we had the lawyers draw this up, and it became a buy-to-let mortgage. Now, mortgage just means it's secured on the property. So basically it's a business loan to enable them to rent the property out. Now that's allowed because it's not covered by the Consumer Credit Act. The lawyers put in a clause saying this is not covered by the Consumer Credit Act. She had to sign to say she would definitely not live in the property. If she lived in the property, then it's a personal loan. It's actually a homeowner mortgage, which is definitely covered by the FCA and not allowed unless you are regulated. That's why lots of mortgage brokers only do buy-to-let. They're unregulated mortgage brokers. It's an unregulated field. But as soon as you try and get a mortgage for your own home, you have to go to a regulated mortgage broker because they're the only ones that are allowed to. So we had to make sure that it was a business loan, that she wasn't going to live in it, even though she'd been living in it previously. And in order to do that, we had to check that the council permitted her to rent the property out whilst she owned it after the right to buy. And it did. It allowed for tenancies to be created. It allowed for her to move out. I didn't think they would allow it. I thought they'd say, well, we're selling it to you at a massive discount. Clearly you have to live in it. You're not allowed to sell it to anyone. You're not allowed to rent it out. Not the case. I was quite surprised. So she was allowed to rent it out. So what we did is she rented it out. She made a nice profit for the first year. And we charged her a very modest amount of interest that was payable. But what we did is we made the interest rate much higher. So it was in the order of 4% per month. Now that sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds crazy that we're charging 4% a month. She had to sign a disclaimer with her lawyer. They said, this is crazy, you shouldn't sign this. What if you can't pay, etc. But the reason was we had to have a way of her ending this agreement. We don't want to become mortgage lenders for the next 10 years. So it had to be a short-term loan. In effect, it was a bridging loan. But she didn't want to repay it straight away. She needed the 12 months. So what we said was, I think her interest was, well, I don't want to disclose the number, but it was 4% a month. And we reduced that down to something like 0.5% a month payable. So the 3.5% a month rolled up, and it was all due in month 13. Now, if you think about that, that makes sense, because in month 13, she's either going to pay off the loan, which will be the 4% a month plus the capital, which is great. And if that happened, my business partner and I are really happy because he's going to get his money, a really good return on his money, and I get 50%. I always go 50-50 generally on my JVs, and I get 50% of the profit from not having put any money in, just having sat down for a few days and worked it all out. So it was a really good deal for both of us if she repaid the loan. If she didn't repay the loan, then we would commence repossession proceedings, which I reckoned would take at least 12 months, because A, we've never done it before, B, we're not, NatWest, we're not doing it all day, every day, don't have the in-house lawyers and all of that. And so we would then repossess after 2 years, which would mean the council would deduct they're 60% of the loan, but we can keep, well, the purchaser would be able to keep 40% of the discount. And that worked great for us because our interest would keep accruing at 4% a month. We would repossess, and basically there was enough equity in that 40% that the deal worked for us, that we got enough of a chunk of money from the deal. So really complicated deal. I'd love to know how much of that you worked out yourself. The best that one of my mentors could come up with was becoming her boyfriend and buying it as a couple and then splitting up and selling the property on later. But I'm not in the business of polygamy, nor lying about being someone's spouse in order to make a few pounds. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge, no one's solved this, and hopefully that's given you another string to your bow. If you ever come across someone who's got the right to buy a property and they don't know what to do with it, then let us know. We'll happily help you structure it. It's worked. It's an interesting deal, a very interesting deal, one that we weren't the purchaser, we weren't the vendor, really unusual. We negotiated with the purchaser and the vendor had all the rules. The vendor was the expert. Normally we're giving the vendor a structure, we're helping the vendor to solve their problem, but in this instance, the vendor's the council, we help the purchaser to solve their problem, to take advantage of this situation. And you might think, you're repossessing the property, Frank, that's not great. Let's not forget, the purchaser has had an income for 3 years. They've made a profit off this deal for 3 years. Yes, they're going to lose the property now. They didn't manage to refinance at the end of 12 months. That's a shame. Now they probably can't refinance because they'd be in negative equity with ourselves. But they've made 3 years of income they wouldn't have made otherwise. And they had the opportunity that they were definitely going to lose. Hopefully, guys, that has given you an extra strategy, an extra awareness of what's possible, an extra insight into the mentality, the psychology of doing these deals. If you believe you can do them and you believe there's a solution to every problem, then there is. If you believe you can or you believe you can't, then you're right. And I couldn't agree more. Until next time, guys, happy investing.